Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's Friday again. This time it's Parashat Achrei-mot and Kedoshim. Now, Achrei-mot and Kedoshim are incredibly busy parashiot. If we've been used to the first few parashiot of Vayikra, mostly focusing on what people may seem as slightly more boring topics, such as korbanot or tzaraat or stuff like that, now we're into the really juicy stuff that I think touches every single one of us in our daily lives. Parashat Kedoshim especially, we have so many different mitzvot that fall under the rubric of Bein Adam Lechavero, interpersonal, societal relationships and attitudes, most famously represented by the phrase which has gone down in Jewish and non-Jewish history. The Christians very much adopted this as well, of Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your fellow human as you love yourself. And there's so many other different breakdowns of this and how does that work in lots of different situations and lots of different mitzvot. And in Parashat Achrei-mot, we also have the Avodah of the Kohen HaGadol on Yom Kippur, the whole identity of Yom Kippur as one of the most holy and important days in the year. That all comes through at the beginning of Achrei-mot. So there's a lot going on in our parasha. But there's one topic that gets a lot of press in both Parashat Achrei-mot and Parashat Kedoshim. In many ways is a repetition of the same ideas, and it seems to be a very crucial piece of Sefer Vayikra and of the Torah in general. And what I'm talking about is the whole question of Gilui Arayot, in this case, sexual morality. Now, I'm well aware that this field is a minefield, and it's very easy to step on a landmine and cause damage, cause upset, cause misunderstanding. And I would like to apologize in advance to those who may feel like I stepped on or I'm about to step on some landmines. And if I do, I hope that I don't do too much damage. But nonetheless, I think it's important because, as often we say, lefum tzara agra, if there is a price, it means it's worthwhile. In this situation, I think this is a very important topic, which is very crucial, especially to us today, to talk about from our perspective. It's very much discussed from every different perspective, and to a certain degree, it is very, very much in front of people's minds across our society. And I think it's very important that we talk about what the Torah has to say about this topic as well. And I'd like to try and address this topic using 4 key words that the Torah uses, that our parasha uses, our parashiot use. And I think they are in many ways keys to understanding the messages, the moral messaging that our parasha, that Hashem through our parasha is giving to us on this very crucial topic. Now, whenever it comes to terminology, we always like to jump straight to translation. But in truth, very good terminology cannot be translated into other languages. That's why there is no English translation for the word karma or umami, right? Some things they are what they are, and it's very hard to explain them and to identify them, but we all know what they are. So I'm going to use 4 terminologies, and I'm going to try and delve into them and see the moral messaging, but they do not translate well into English, and most of the time, the translation actually does a disservice. The 4 words that I would like to use to address this topic, which I think appear in our parasha, are to'eva, erva, tum'ah, and kedusha. And we're going to go through each and every one of them. The first word, to'eva, is a very strong word. It kind of translates as disgust. But I think disgust, in this case, it needs to be seen less of a, like, something gross, and more of maybe a communal reaction. I think maybe if we were to give an equivalent word in our modern day, to'eva might be taboo. There are certain things when it comes to sexual morality, societies across the world, universally, have certain taboos. And these are the taboos that are being addressed in our parasha. The most classic example, I think, is the whole idea of familial relationships, right? When it comes to relationships between siblings, between parents and children, and the like, these are things that are universal taboos. It doesn't matter if we're talking about a Native American tribe, or if we're talking about a tribe from the Aborigines in Australia, if we're talking about people from Peru or people from Siberia. Everyone agrees that there are certain taboos. These are universal. These are societal norms that are as ancient as humankind. And there are many different explanations for exactly why that is, but these are the basic taboos. And I think it's important that we recognize that the Torah does not just recognize the existence of these taboos, but actually codifies the concept of taboo. Society reacts to certain things, and sometimes that reaction is good and is normal and is to be upheld. And what does that mean? That means that very often we view, and especially today, we like to view this whole question of sexual identity through the prism of the individual. But here I think the Tanakh, the Torah, Hashem, gives us a certain perspective and says, no, wait a second, this is also part of the community. We have a society, and the society has norms. Some things, maybe individually, you might be 100% fine with. But as a society, we do not allow these things here. This is not what we do. This is not good for us as a society, and it's good for people to follow societal norms. Now, I think the modern sexual revolution very much came to fight back against sometimes when those norms kind of exceed their mandate. Sometimes they can be oppressive, and that's part of the debate, exactly where does that taboo go? But I think to a certain degree, the existence of a social taboo is incredibly important and is something which is good to uphold. That is the first thing. To'eva, taboo. The second thing is the concept of erva. Erva, which as we know from the phrase gilui arayot, comes from the word to hide, to have some sort of, in many ways, private element to us. That's why we call them private parts. Erva, I would like to give the equivalent English word of privacy. When it comes to sexual morality today, and especially with the generation of the internet, very often there is no such thing as privacy anymore. Everything that goes on outside in the public square is now available in our personal space. There is no place where you are safe. Wherever you are connected to the internet, you are in essence outside. We know this, unfortunately, from the world of bullying in schools, right? There is no private safe space. Children, even in their own personal bedrooms, are still being hounded on social media. There is no privacy. There is no place which is the distinction between outside and inside. But that also happens the other way around in our case. Unfortunately, today, people are broadcasting from inside to the outside world. People are broadcasting what goes on in their own personal lives, their own personal bedrooms. That suddenly is something which is discussed in the communal space. There is no distinction between personal and public, between private and exposed. And I think when it comes to the word erva is not necessarily negative. Not at all. Erva just means private. Erva means things that are to be kept under wraps. The opposite of erva is gilui erva, is to expose those parts. Private parts are not bad parts, they're just private parts. And I think the message that Torah gives here is that, yes, there are arayot, and arayot are natural parts of life. Every person has their own bedroom, their own things that go on in their bedroom, their own personal, individual private parts and sexual organs and sexual identity, but that is not necessarily something that needs to be exposed. That is something that needs to be kept private. That is not something that needs to be migule, gilui arayot, but to a certain degree kept private. And by the way, going through all of the psukim, we will find many times it says lo tikrevu legalot erva. Make sure that you keep each thing in its own personal space and do not mix up all of these different elements. So that's the second part, erva. The third element that I want to touch on is the element of tum'ah. And tum'ah we find, for example, in our parasha, it says explicitly, Al titamu b'chol ele, do not become tamei through all of these things. Ki b'chol ele nitmeu hagoyim asher ani meshalech b'fnechem. Right, these are things that have caused trouble in the past. Right, Hashem says in our parasha that the previous nations were deeply sunken into this world of tum'ah, which we will try and give a good explanation for in a second. And that is, if you follow in their footsteps, you too will get sucked in to this morose, and it will cause you much damage, and you will not be able to survive in the land of Israel, the land of Kedusha, which we shall talk about in a second as well. What is tum'ah? I think tum'ah is often mistranslated as impure, but it's not impure per se. Tum'ah means something that has been, in many ways, I would say, contaminated. That is tameh. Tameh is something which has gone through a certain procedure, often involving death or some equivalent of that, and that is brought with it a permanent consequence. That consequence is that is now tameh. It needs to go through a certain procedure to make it tahor again. If this tameh thing touches you, if you become tameh, there are consequences. You can't eat certain things, you can't do certain things, you can't go certain places. I think to a certain degree, tum'ah is the word that I'd like to mirror tum'ah with today is the word consequences. And when it comes to the world of sexual morality, today we very often like to think of free love. Free love involving free, no consequences. Everyone is able to just do what they want. And there are no consequences to that. The next day you continue on with your life. And whatever happened the night before, what happened in Vegas stays in Vegas. I think that concept is something that the Torah does not believe in. There's no such thing as free love. There's no such thing as free sexuality. It will always have consequences. Whether the consequences are in the realm of reproduction, whether there are children involved, but even today, with all of the different technological advances, that might not necessarily be the case. I think it's important that Torah is also saying, fine, even if there are no physical consequences, there are always emotional consequences. There are always spiritual consequences. There are always interpersonal and identity consequences. Nothing is so simple as this thing, which is sexuality, which leads me to the fourth term, which is Kedusha. Our parasha, especially the second parasha, says, Kedoshim tiyu, ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem. Be holy. And again, another one of these words that doesn't translate well. Kadosh is not holy. Kadosh is not sanctified. Kadosh is kadosh. Let's try and understand what kadosh means. Kadosh, I think the best word that really works with kadosh is special, unique. Special is more than just regular. Special is recognition of value, recognition of importance. Something that we mekadshim, we make Shabbat, we start Shabbat with kiddush, vayikadesh oto, because we recognize the uniqueness of Shabbat, the specialness of Shabbat. Kadosh represents the idea that there is a higher purpose, that there is a calling, that this is something which has unique meaning. And when it comes to sexuality, as Rabbi Akiva says, Kol Hashirim Kodesh, Shir Hashirim Kodesh Kodashim. This is ultimately the most unique and special and creative in its most deepest divine form. Sexuality holds within it two main elements to it. One element is obviously the creation of new life. We are literally God. We are creating humans, right? As Chazal say, Shlosha Shutafim Ba'adam, there are three people who take part, three entities that go into making a child, a mother, a father, and the divine. So we, in essence, are Shutafim B'Ma'aseh Bereshit. So that is the first part. The idea, the ability to create, the ability to bring life. In many ways, the antithesis of Tum'ah, which is death. But there's a second element of Kedusha, which is the idea of Kedusha, of the bond, the relationship. Kedusha is also Harei at Mekudeshet Li. the idea of the husband and wife, the idea of the two elements of the sexual partnership bonding together in Hashem Echad U'Shmo Echad. As Chazal say, Zachu Shechina B'neheh. A man and wife, not only with regard to the child, but with regard to their own bond, their own relationship, are in many ways creating something divine. That bond, that unique moment of Kedusha in the Kodesh Kodeshim, the Kruvim that are together, the embrace of the Kruvim, in many ways bringing forth Hashem into this world, that bond is Kadosh. And that bond is something that we need to be striving towards. Sexuality is something which we need to put on a pedestal, but we need to give it its place. We need to recognize that indeed it might be Kodesh Kodeshim, but Kodesh Kodeshim is not accessible at all times. Kodesh Kodeshim is not something which is abused. Kodesh Kodeshim is something which is understood, valued, in many ways used correctly, as we see from the beginning of the Parasha with Achrei-mot, right? Bezot yavo Aharon el HaKodesh. This is the right way to do it. But at the end of the day, in many ways, it's like the engine room of the universe, right? The Even Hashtiyah, the place from which the universe sprouted. Hayom Harat Olam, the idea of Yom Kippur and all of these, the Bet HaMikdash and all being the source, the beginning, the creation, the birth, the rejuvenation, all of these ideas, they're all deeply packed into the idea of Kedusha, of the intimacy, of the sexuality, of the bond, of the relationship. So if we break down what we've seen so far, we've seen there's an element of to'eva, there's a societal element, there's an element of erva, there's an element of a personal element, of the privacy element. There's an element of tum'ah, of the consequences. It's not just 2D, it's 3D, it's a whole dimension of what is the consequence, not just in the present, but also in the past, in the future. What are the consequences? What is this going to mean for the rest of your life? And fourth, finally, I would say me'al hateva, stepping out of the natural element to the sexual act. There's also the spiritual light that encompasses the whole concept to understand the core of what that means. So all of these different elements, I think, are wrapped up in this parasha. And these are the messages that Judaism gives to the world. These are the messages of, this is not, as the Catholics say, I mean, we didn't have a new pope, so I think it's important to celebrate, right, or not, the message of stepping away from sexuality, of seeing it as evil, of seeing it as the corruption, not at all. This is, as Rabbi Akiva says, Kodesh Kodeshim. This is something which is the most Jewish thing you can do. And by the way, Jews are very, very good at reproduction, right? Because we believe in it. We believe in bringing life into the world. We believe in creating life, creating the future, creating relationships, creating harmony, creating achdut. These are all the elements that go into this. And I think if we can gain inspiration from all of these ideas, it might give us some guiding lights when approaching this subject. And again, and I hope I tried to do this as delicately as I could. I might have messed up in some places. If you feel so, please feel free to write in the comments and leave a link and a like and subscribe, because this is a YouTube page. Why not? And Be'ezrat Hashem, I look forward to continuing this discussion with each and every one of you. Shabbat Shalom.